And so for each, there are 9 students and there are 9 decades to Trinity's history. So each student has a decade. And they're going to do the talking. I'm just going to kind of hand it off from one to the other. So Trinity was formed in 1934. And Catherine Puffer, Hurricane Katrina, as Audrey calls her, has the first decade of Trinity's life. Come on up, Catherine.
Yay! In the first decade of our church, 1934 to 1944, the world was evolving as the church was forming. 1939 marked the start of World War II with Germany's invasion of Poland, and it dragged on throughout the decade. In the U.S., our inclusion in the war began when Pearl Harbor was attacked in 1941. Valparaiso had its college basketball team of 1938 win the Indiana Intercollegiate title and went on to play in the national tournament in Kansas City, Missouri. All of these were current events to the earliest Trinity members. However, Trinity itself was just forming in this decade. Our church was organized when the earliest members decided to leave Emmanuel Lutheran. Many services were held in the old Vincent property on the northwest corner of Washington and Chicago, our front lawn. This property was soon acquired by the congregation and altered for use. We held our first board elections and asked Pastor George F. Schutz to be the pastor of the new church. He agreed, and the congregation continued to grow.
Thank you, Kate. From 1945 to 1954, we have Finley Stradelmeyer. You do have to project. It's not particularly loud.
My decade is 1945 through 1954, starting towards the end of World War II. In 1945, Germany and Japan surrendered from the war, and the United Nations was formed. Not long after, in 1950, America found itself in another war with Korea. 1945 also brought lots of growth and expansion to Valpo University. In 1951, their football team played in the Cigar Bowl held in Tampa Bay, Florida. Closer to home, a new sanctuary for Trinity was approved in 1947, and the cornerstone was laid in 1950. In 1952, they tore down the house which was previously used for worship, and the pastor during this time was Reverend Fuss.
Thank you. We had the field trip to find the cornerstone, right? We found it right out here. Yeah. All right. The decade 1955 to 1964 is Asher Perkins.
The decade I received for this project is 1955 to 1964. In this decade, there is one main event. This event was the burning of the church mortgage, which signified that the building was finally paid off. There were 2 pastors in this decade, being Pastor Fleshner and Pastor Dane Schrodinger. That is all for this decade, and I hope you enjoyed listening.
Okay. The decade 1965 to 1974 is Chelsea Wade.
Report I have is 1965 to 1974. During the period from 1965 to 1974 was one of the most significant events in the world, was the escalating of the Vietnam War. The United States was spending money on space exploration. Moon landings were occurring at this time as well. Indiana was one of the 6 Midwest states to be ranked by the deadliest tornadoes on Palm Sunday, April 16, 1965. What happened to the church during March 16, 1975? What happened then was marked the beginning of Trinity Lutheran Church's latest era of new installations in the church. The pastor that served during this time was Pastor Frank L. Stevenson.
Okay. All right, we hand off to Jameson Alt. Slide in the table.
In the world news in this decade.
Talk right into the microphone, otherwise we can't hear you.
In the world news in this decade, the fall of Saigon, the Vietnam War occurred between March 4th, 1975 to April 30th, 1975. President Ford called for evacuation for all Americans and
from the troops from Vietnam. The Vietnam War ended then April 30th, 1975. In the United States, singer and songwriter John Lennon was assassinated on December 8th, 1980 in New York City. He was from the English rock band The Beatles. He was 4 years old. In Valparaiso, Indiana, the first popcorn festival started on September 17th, 1979. It was dedicated to Orville Leonard Baker, who lived in Valparaiso and started his popcorn business in Porter County. It is now an annual celebration in Valparaiso. At Trinity Lutheran Church of Valparaiso on April 8th, 1979, the Hendricken tracker pipe organ was dedicated and installed on the balcony of the church. When installed, there were 23 stops, 33 legs, and 1,584 pipes. It was a major addition to the music at Trinity. The pastors that served during this decade included Pastor Richard Howard, Pastor Robert Curley, and Pastor Malky.
Thank you. Alan with the chairs. All right, Elena, you are up.
Decade Report 1985 to 1994. The pastors that served at Trinity Lutheran Church during this decade were Pastor Robert Smith and Pastor John Coast. At Trinity Lutheran Church in November of 1989, Trinity members created and printed their own personalized cookbook with favorite recipes donated by members. The book was entitled A Little Bit of TLC. Also at Trinity, our confirmation teacher, Marty Swinehart, was appointed as an intake officer with the Federal Probation Office in Gary in 1989. In world news, on November 9th, 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. This allowed East Germans to travel to West Germany freely. When the wall fell, it was the first important step towards the unification of Germany as a democratic country, which officially occurred on October 3rd, 1990. In the United States, on January 20th, 1986, Martin Luther King Day was officially observed as a federal holiday. Since then, Martin Luther King Day has been celebrated annually. Valparaiso Station, a train station in Valparaiso, was an outbound terminal for the Amtrak Calumet. That service was discontinued May 3rd, 1991. This ended passenger train service in Valparaiso.
Thank you. I think that means that our next person is Zane Lightsky.
My decade was 1995 to 2004. During my decade, the pastors were Reverend Robert Smith, who stopped working here in 1999, Reverend John Coast, who left in 2000, Reverend Dr. John Santoro, who started in 1999, and Reverend Dr. Frida Scales, who started in 2001. In my decade, it was either 1995 or 1996, I don't remember, but we purchased the house next door. And in 2003 at the annual meeting, Patricia Cummings asked the congregation to work for a peaceful resolution to the conflict between the U.S. and Iraq. Porter County experienced a housing boom in the late 1990s and early 2000s. During this time, nearly 45% of new residential units were built. An event in the world in my decade was 9/11 in 2001.
Okay. All right. Next up is Freya Gowan.